Hi, it's Miss Lisa from the St. Paris Public Library. Welcome back to our chapter book reading program. Just before bed, we're reading the book Guardians of Ga'Hoole. This is night number 5, so we're going to get busy. Chapter 17, The Deadly Sisters. As we approached the northeast side of the island, we spotted a few of the sisters below us skimming the kelp beds in a small inlet. Others were combing the beach. They wore snoods on the backs of their heads and falling to their shoulders a kind of ornamental net woven from the lacy seaweed native to the island. Across their faces they draped veils of the same seaweed, but with large eye openings so they could see. "I don't know how they fly with that stuff hanging all over them," Lil said. "They probably wonder how we fly with battle claws," Moss replied. "Look," Lil said, flipping her head up. "There's an honest-to-Glock smee hole above the cliffs where they have Orf." I felt a sudden tinge in my gizzard. If that's the case, silence. I gave the wing-waggle signal. Although we hadn't quite mastered the code, I did my best to explain a strategy with it. We would soar on the updrafts of the steam vents directly over the cave and listen in on the Ice Talon's operatives. Steam, like water and air, transmits sound beautifully. Despite my far from perfect signaling, the other 3 owls immediately grasped what I was saying. So we swooped into the smee hole and soon could pick up the voices of the duplicitous owls of the Ice Talon League. Skellig's voice gave us a shock. He sounded older, more mature, and spoke with a clipped assurance. The Great Horned was no cadet, but a seasoned commander. Great Glocks! My gizzard swelled with loathing for him. "I think he's coming around," Skellig said. "I put just enough powder in his cup to get him here. Maybe we can get something out of him." Orf didn't sound like himself either. He was decidedly groggy, but alive. His heart was definitely beating. I could see the relief in everyone's eyes. Still, Skellig's words made my gizzard flinch. We can get something out of him. He must mean the formula for cold coals, and if they got it out of him, would they kill him? We had thought they were going to capture Orf and bring him to their armory to begin forging, but it sounded as if they only wanted the formula. But what assurance did they have that Orf would give them the real formula? Had Skellig learned enough in his observation to be able to discern the right one from a fake? "We'll get him to the abandoned forge on the far side of the storm fast," one of the eagle owls said. At this, I thought Thora was going to go kerplonkin'. Her forge, her secret forge. Once there, they would test the formula, and if it worked, they would kill Orf. If it didn't, they would torture him until he gave them the right formula. We had to get out of the smee hole draft. We had to talk and not be heard. I gave a slight wing tap to Moss, who was flying next to me, and made a quick exit. The others followed. We roosted up on the west side of Elsmore, downwind from the cave. They couldn't hear us. "We have to act fast," Thora said. "I'll bet you anything they pilfered cold coals from someone. If not Orf, then another smith at Darkfowl. Skellig himself probably did it." I thought of that moleskin pouch that Thora had told us about, in which Skellig had carried the powders to drug Orf. He could have used one just like it to carry cold coals. They might have withered a bit, but they could be revived if someone knew what they were doing. Once Orf has been forced to show them how to forge a weapon with cold coals, they'll kill him on the spot. "We have to think of something," I said. Everyone was listening to me except for Lil, who was looking off towards the beach below where we were perched. She had begun to peel off her battle claws. "What are you doing?" Thora asked. "I have an idea. You and me, Thora, we have to get down to the beach and get some seaweed." "Whatever for? We're sisters." "Huh?" Thora said. Moss and I blinked. "Gloxian sisters. We're going to make ourselves some snoods and veils and take vows of silence except to give succor to the wounded. And there's one other rule here, non-violence, but not us. We are going to be deadly, the deadliest sisters on the island." "Hello," Lil trilled in the sweet tones of the very elderly owl. Sister Almacia here, and Sister Polyphar, Thora added. We believe we have a wounded soldier with you. Everything's fine, one of the owl eagles replied. Oh, we thought we saw a vacuum transport. It's nothing to worry about, Skellig said. No, we're doing quite fine in here, said another of the eagle owls, poking his head out of the cave. He was unclawed, and his bare talons showed. An agonizing cry of pain punctured the air. Oh, dear, Lil exclaimed in a hoarse voice. That doesn't sound fine to me, does it, Sister Polyphar? She gave a slight nod, and the two owls charged into the cave. Before the Skellig and the eagle owls knew what had happened, Lil had drawn out Miss Hotpoint, her hot lance, and hurled it. The lance pierced Skellig's starboard wing. Let me finish the damage done by the nest-made snake. Or was it a siege blade? Lil screeched. The pile of feathers that was Orf sprang to life. He seized a pair of battle claws that lay discarded and lashed out at an eagle owl, raking his eyes from its face. Thora jousted with a half-scimitar of her own design. Moss and I flew into the cave, both of us armed with ice. The one eagle owl, now blinded, was no longer in contention, but there were still 3 more eagle owls, one fully clawed, one half-clawed, and one bare-taloned. We needed to get them into the air where we could fight better and where we could have the advantage because they didn't have any weapons, or so we thought, until the half-clawed eagle produced a flail and began whirling it overhead. He was aiming at Lil, who was trying to retrieve Miss Hotpoint from Skellig's shattered and bloody wing. Lil, leave it, I shouted. She ducked just in time. The flail swung by her and hit a target all right, Skellig. It split his skull nearly in half. Orf stepped up and intricated the flail from the bloody pulp of what had been Skellig's head. All right, you contemptible old grotter, you. Orf swung the flail with an ease and grace unlike anything I had ever seen. He was vastly superior to any of our instructors. Of course, Orf had designed the weapon and knew it like no other owl. The eagle owls beat a hasty retreat, streaking out of the cave, and that was where the real surprise happened. In the vanishing light of the day, as the sky became tinged with what owls call first lavender, 2 owls emerged out of the clouds, one huge and the other tiny. It was Loki and Blix, the great gray and the northern sawwheat. I saw something slice through the air like a tail of an infinitesimally small comet. There was a spurt of very red blood, heart's blood, and one of the eagle owls plummeted. What aim! Another comet flew by, thrown by Blix almost immediately after the first. Great glocks, I thought. Loki and Blix were doing exactly what I had imagined. A mid-air reload. Loki was carrying a quiver of ice splinters, and Blix launched them one after another. We began to fight with renewed vigor. This was not a squadron, not a platoon, nor even a brigade, but exactly what I dreamed of. A hyper-maneuverable unit of owls of mixed sizes who were all fighting at the knife edge of our skills. The battle was over as fast as it had begun. Fetch up! Fetch up! Orf shouted as we flew to the roosting place where we had originally planned out the assault. I was breathless, not just from the combat, but from the overwhelming surprise of Loki and Blix's arrival. Where did you come from? I stammered. We were all shocked. Loki explained. Orf was discovered missing just after midday, then Euphor and Skellig. By the way, where is Skellig? Blix asked. Dead. Oh dear, Blix gasped. Don't waste your tears, Lil said. Blix grimaced. It looked like he might have been in on this. Someone said they saw him snitch cold coals. But then Euphor turned up missing too. They were ready to blame you as well. Us, Thora said indignantly. Especially you, Thora. They said you were always hanging around Orf's forge, Loki added. Well, she was, Orf explained. Don't blame Thora if it hasn't been for Thora. Orf's voice dwindled as if he couldn't contemplate the fate he had escaped. If it hadn't been for Thora, none of us would be here, I cut in. But how did you and Loki ever find us? One of the gad feathers? I don't think those owls ever sleep. She said she thought she saw the 4 of you flying off. Loki and I were so upset. They're going to decom you from the academy. Chapter 18. An Odd Welcome. Did we return to glory? Not precisely, for even though we had rescued Orf, our methods were looked upon as dubious. The air was thick with the suspicions of the old-timers like Lude Dude and his friends. An elf owl, Colonel Stellan Microthene Whitney, the instructor of the B unit of the Frostbeaks, was outraged that Blix took not one, but 5, count them, Blix, 5 ice splinters. But I only used 3, Colonel Stellan Microthene Whitney, and those hit their mark. 1 even got heart's blood. I don't give a bloody rack drop about heart's blood, she ranted. You took ice splinters from the armory without using the proper sign-out procedure, and I'm not even sure how you carried them all. Oh, Colonel, I can explain that, I offered. Shut up, Cadet Lies Megascops, Dude Lude thundered. If Orf had been there, he would have jumped to our defense, but he had been hustled off to high command for a debriefing. So we were subjected to a scorching reprimand. Our rescue of Orf took a back wing to the innumerable rules we had violated, which our superiors were only too willing to trot out one by one ad yarbium. Number 1, Optimus Strixveria, the regimental commander, began. You were all absent without leave. AWOL, he roared. Number 2, you initiated a combat mission without consulting your commanding officer. Number 3, on and on he went. I was dying to interrupt and say, Number 4, we got Orf back, you idiot old fogies. I wanted to explain how brilliant Blix and Loki had been. I wanted to describe the mid-air reload. I wanted to tell them Thor's idea for a new kind of quiver to make reloading even easier. Orf returned from his debriefing and listened carefully and with obvious surprise to the sharp criticism we were taking. By this time, the regimental commander had almost exhausted his venomous lecture and was becoming slightly more conciliatory. Well, cadets, I hope you have learned your lesson, Optimus Strixveria sighed wearily. Lesson? What lesson? Orf growled. We are the ones who need to learn some lessons here. What these young'uns did out there was nothing short of brilliant. I've just cleared it with the Speaker of the Parliament, General Andreas Tito Alba. Cadet Thora is no longer to be in training as a combat cadet. I told you so, snickered Colonel Stella Microthene Whitney. They're decommissioning her. I heard that, Colonel, Orf roared. Nothing of the sort. Thora is to serve as a cadet apprentice to me. A female blacksmith? A murmur rose among the commanding officers. Insane, someone whispered. Strange credulity, Dude hissed. Don't strain that wee brain of yours too hard, Captain Ludwig Ossio Flammius. We wouldn't want a cranial rupture, Orf muttered, flapping his wings noisily. He turned to Thora and said, Follow me, Cadet Apprentice Thora Nicety Scandiasa. This is somewhat extraordinary. Orf had just addressed Thora by her full species name, a sign of the highest respect. A silence fell in the hollow. Colonel Stellan and others seemed to wilf and meekly part ways as the blacksmith marched through the crowd. Thora herself seemed stunned. Orf glared at Lude Dude and Stellan and the others as he passed, but he smiled when he stopped in front of me. Lies? He nodded, turning to Lil, Blix, and Loki as well. General Adricus wishes to meet with you. Thora, you too. All 5 of you, follow me. I thought I heard a snicker from Lude Dude, as if to hint that finally we were to get our comeuppance. I had to admit I thought the same, and as we entered the General's hollow, my gizzard was a quiver. General Andreas Tito Alba was a strikingly handsome owl, except for a scar that ran down his breast. It was said an ice splinter had come within inches of his heart in a battle in the High Harath years before. He had fought on fiercely, though. Blood had poured from his chest. The general was quite large for a barn owl, and some said he had the strength of an eagle owl, the largest of all owls. Stern, uncompromising, he was not one to suffer fools or cowards. His back was towards us as we entered, but he wheeled about. The scar blazed across his chest in a diagonal slash. It was shocking to look at. I couldn't help but wonder how the attack had missed his heart, how he could have survived such a wound. "And what do you cadets plan to do for your summer holidays?" the general asked. "You certainly deserve a holiday." I could feel everyone's relief. We were not going to be punished. "Thora and I had hoped to go to the Shangda Snarl with Blix and Loki, sir," I replied. "I'm not sure what I plan to do," Moss answered. "Oh, great glocks, I nearly forgot." The general swiveled his head towards us. "Cadet Lies Megascops, a message for you was delivered by your Aunt Hanja. She says that you are expected home, a new home, as I understand your family hollow was destroyed. Let's see, Sergeant Alian Tito Castanops," he called out. The general's secretary, a masked owl, came forward. "Yes, sir," the sergeant saluted crisply. "Do you have the note left by his aunt?" "Right here, sir. Let me see it." The general took out a pair of Eisenblauen spectacles, thinner than the combat goggles. They magnified his eyes enormously as he began to read the piece of birch bark. "Says here that your family has relocated to a hollow on the northern side of Stormfast, up an inlet in the grove of spruce trees. They expect you home for, oh my goodness, a blessed event. Your mum seems to have laid an egg, and they will be in residence most of the summer." "Oh," I said quietly. "That's marvelous news," the general boomed. "Yes," I replied in a subdued voice, but in truth I was rather disappointed. I hadn't really finished grieving for Lysa. How could Lysa be replaced so easily? I suppose that's how it was in the owl world, especially when we had been at war for a century. We were always told we must forge on. If a parent died, the remaining mate usually found a new partner quickly. It was simply our way. We had to move forward. But I was not quite ready to forge on, and I really wanted to go to the Shangda Snarl with Blix, Loki, and Thora. I wanted to see how the winds hatched. I wanted to feel their furl as they were birthed out in the coldest place on earth, by the hot tentacles that snaked out from the volcano and its lava lake in the mysterious Nacht Stead. I wanted to see that lake where rocks melted. It was a place of legend, but I knew legends were born from unrevealed truths. Legends tell stories about forces we sometimes cannot understand, but are part of the fabric of our lives. I so wanted to go, but it was not to be. As I was leaving, the general stopped me. "Wait a minute, lad. I have a question for you." "Yes, sir." "Orf told me that you have some notions, some ideas about, well, how should I put it? Newfangled ways of fighting. You did pretty well out there in Elsmere. Apparently this mid-air reload was something to behold." I had mentioned the idea to Blix and Loki, sir, but they really figured it out. They should get the credit. "When you return, I'll be most pleased if you would come visit me again and share any other ideas you might have." "Really, sir?" I squeaked. "Yes, really." He opened his eyes wide and blinked behind the Eisenblauen spectacles. "Want to give me a hint as to one or two of those ideas now?" My heart raced, my gizzard quickened. This was a rare opportunity. The instructors at the academy never listened to cadets. How could I forget Captain Lude's accusation that I was being too fanciful? And now that was just what the general was asking me to do. Within a space of a minute, my existence, my life, took on new meaning. "Sir, have you ever thought of including Killian snakes in a combat unit?" "Killian snakes?" He shoved his head forward and removed his spectacles. "Great glocks, no. It rather boggles the mind." "Not mine," I replied. "I think they're underutilized." The general considered. "Come up with a plan and I'll hear you out." "Absolutely, sir." I have to admit that my spirits were lifted considerably. The prospect of going home and not to Shangda Snarl was less grim. Now my main concern was how much I would miss Lil. I already had an ache in my heart and a soreness in my gizzard. My first season at the Killian Military Academy had drawn to a close. I would return when the first snows of Liffenschmuh began to fall, and by the following spring I would be a commissioned officer in the Allied forces of the Killian League. Chapter 19. A New Hollow and a New Outlet. Our new hollow was in a stand of stout blue spruce. I could imagine that in the winter, when the snow stayed fast on the ground, it would be lovely. This type of spruce, as its name indicated, has a bluish tinge, and the shadow is cast would fall like a blue filigree net on the white snow. By the time I arrived, my new brother, Ifgar, had hatched. Like many owlets that hatch at this time of the year, he was advanced. Summer chicks tend to be that way. The hunting is good, so they grow fast. He was fledgling out nicely, but all right, I'll admit it right here. He did not capture my heart the way Lisa had, but he was a good little fellow, and he worshipped me. Mum and Da seemed fine. One morning, towards Twix time, I remembered something very clever and funny that Lisa had said about the sun just as it was rising. Mum, Da, I said, once at Twix time, Lisa peeked out the hollow and said that the sun reminded her of a... But the words died on my beak because both my parents swiveled their heads towards me and glared. Never mind, I whispered. It was clear that I was not ever to mention Lisa, the old hollow, or even Gundifer again. Lingering emotions were considered a sign of weakness among seasoned soldiers of the Killian League. There had been a period of mourning, and they believed that prolonging it served no purpose. It was as if that part of their lives had been sealed off forever. Oddly enough, it wasn't until I had been there for nearly an entire day and night that I thought of Gilda. I was shocked that I had not noticed her absence. Perhaps I, too, had begun to seal off those memories. Before I could stop myself, a question slid out. Mum, what happened to Gilda? Oh, I let her go. Let her go? How could you? She saved my life. Well, she wasn't a very good housekeeper. I felt I could do it better. She was very distractible. I think nest mating wasn't really in her, how should I put it, her skill set. I nearly exploded. I wanted to say, you're darn right it was, and Gilda was a fighter, a warrior if I ever saw one. My mum continued, I felt I could take care of this new hollow as well as any nest-made snake. My mother was betraying a sudden streak of domesticity that was completely unlike her. The first thing she had announced upon my arrival was that she had no broody for Ifgar. She seemed enormously proud of having brooded him herself. I dared not ask if she was contemplating retirement. My father was not considering any such thing. Indeed, he was called back to the front on the eve of Ifgar's first meat on bone ceremony. At dawn, before he left, Da and I went out to hunt for rock monks, which were at their tenderest this time of year and perfect for Ifgar. Their flesh was almost creamy consistency. Mum had a funny light in her eyes as she greeted us on the branch outside when we returned. A familiar trill issued forth from deep in the hollow. But look who's here! My gizzard locked. It was Tatyahanja. I'm just in time, she said, waddling forth. No wonder my mum had that odd look in her eye. One family member has to leave, but another arrives. Nothing like family about when it comes to these ceremonies, Tatyahanja cackled. But I want my Da, whined Ifgar. He'll be here for the ceremony, dear, my mother said, but then he'll have to leave right after, Ifgar complained. I'm here, darling lad, Tatyahanja. I know all the songs. I don't like the way you sing. It hurts my slits. Ifgar, shame on you, Mum scolded, but I nearly laughed out loud. It was not the jolliest of ceremonies, although we all did our best. I kept thinking about Gilda and wishing she had been here. She always told such good stories. Who cared about her skill sets as a nest maid? A very nice barred owl family and another family of barn owls stopped by. Moss, bless his soul, showed up at the last minute with his 3 sisters who had grown into lovely lasses and would be returning to the academy with us come autumn. I noticed that everyone perched as far away as possible from Tatyahanja. I found myself actually feeling sorry for her. Once upon a time, she had a mate. but he died rather young. She led a very lonely life. Some say that she had attempted to be a Gadfeather, but her voice was such that she never had a real following. The one time she had attended the yearly spring equinox gathering of Gadfeathers, she performed to an audience of one, an elderly whiskered screech, who had seemed quite besotted by her, but had dropped dead within hours of hearing her sing. That fixed her reputation, not simply as a terrible singer, but as an ill-omened owl. Thinking about all this depressed me greatly, especially as I hadn't received any messages from Lil since I had returned home. Every day I looked for the great horned owl messenger. Great horns were most often messengers, for they flew the fastest of all of us. I also looked for a falcon just in case. Falcons can fly twice as fast as an owl, but they were generally reserved for military messaging. I had written to Lil once, but hadn't received any reply, and was uncertain if I should write to her again. I didn't want to seem too eager, but I was eager, darn it. 4 days after Ilfgar's meat on bone ceremony, I couldn't help myself and took a charred twig to begin to scratch something out on a piece of birch bark. "What you doing?" Ilfgar asked, trying to perch beside me. "What does it look like I'm doing?" "Writing a letter." "That's right." "Who to?" Ilfgar could be a little annoying at times, and once he started asking questions, they multiplied endlessly. "A friend." "What kind of friend?" "Just somebody I met at the academy." "What kind of somebody?" "Really, Ilfgar, how can I write if you keep interrupting me?" "Quit pestering lies, Ilfgar. Come help me tuck in this rabbit's ear moss." "I bet it's a girlfriend," Ilfgar hooted. "Ha ha ha ha. Lies has a girlfriend, Lies has a girlfriend." He began to dance around the hollow, chanting this annoying refrain. "Why don't you just go outside and announce it to the whole world?" I exploded. "I think I will." He had just started branching, was quite full of himself. He had taken right to it. I could hear him outside hopping about. Then suddenly he gasped, "Mom, a messenger's coming." I was out of the hollow in no time and flew up to where Ilfgar had perched. My gizzard was thumping. It was a great horned with a scroll in his talons. I would have been here sooner, but this was passed on to me. The falcon was intercepted. I felt a twinge of anguish. Is it for me? The great horn looked at me narrowly. "Not unless you're Major Ulfa Megascops Tryphoposis." "Oh, great glocks," I thought, trying to still my gizzard. "No, I'm not," I said softly. "I'll get her." My mom took the scroll with trembling talons. I didn't need to hear the news. We both knew what the scroll like this meant. Her beak quivered as she read the words. "Dear Major Ulfa Megatops Tryphosis, it saddens me to inform you that your mate, General Raskin Megascops Tryphosis, Supreme Commander of the Killian League, fell in battle in the Harath Rang 2 nights ago. General Ras died serving his league valiantly. He took an ice sword straight to the gizzard." Death had touched us again. First Edvard, then Lysa, and now my Da. Death bears with it a stain that steeps into the hollow and fills the mind. Those first days when dawn came and I tried to sleep while hearing the soft mewling of my mother, my thoughts were streaked with memories of Da and me together and our wonderful flight to the Hawk. It was as if it was all I could think about. In my dreams, it was my father who flew into the sea smoke and seemed to dissolve before my eyes as the smoke thickened. The dreamscape merged with the suffocating smoke of the fiery pine from the night when Lysa died. The haunting scent of the sweet boiling sap suffused my dreams, almost like a scroom of the tree. That smell had clung in my feathers for days after Lysa's death. I remember being so glad when I molted that season, for at last the cloying odor had gone, but now it came back again to haunt my dreams of death. My mother became deeply morose, and as the nights passed, only seemed to be getting worse. Until this point, my experience with grief had been limited to Lysa's death. I had known Lysa for just a few scant moons, and I couldn't imagine how difficult it must be to lose a mate, for countless moons, for years. Mom became so quiet and so unresponsive to Ilfgar, who was a demanding little owlet, that I asked her if I might not be a good idea to get a new nest made snake. Mom seemed obsessed with trailing around the nest and cleaning up vermin. No, she said, I need something to keep me busy. Don't I keep you busy? Ilfgard asked plaintively. Oh, Ilfgard, you have lies, she said, trying to sound cheerful. He's teaching you wonderful things. How's your flying coming along? He says I'll soon be ready to fly to the Hawk. I couldn't wait until he was ready, for I really wanted to try to find Hoke. I had not stopped thinking about my ideas or how General Andreas Tito Alba had encouraged me to think about what he called the newfangled ways of fighting. One evening, when my mother's silence lay as thick as bricked schnee in the middle of winter, and I felt I couldn't stand it one more minute, I turned to her. Mum, I said, flipping my head around to where she was distractedly petting some of Ilfgar's new feathers. When I was at the academy, I wasn't sure how to begin. Had what? Ilfgar said. A girlfriend? He said, smirking. I remember wondering how a little owlet knew how to smirk. It felt unseemly in one so young. No, Ilfgar, I snapped. I had some ideas about warfare. My mum blinked. Really, dear? It was the first time since the news of Da's death that I had seen a genuine sparkle in her eye. It illuminated our hollow like a blast of sunlight. Yes, Mum, and General Andreas Tito Alba encouraged me to come up with more over the break. Andreas himself? Well, tell me about it. She turned to my brother. Don't interrupt as often as you do. Try to listen, Ilfgar. I took a deep breath. Mom, how big is your commando unit, the Ice Daggers? 20 owls. All whiskered screeches? No, a couple of barn owls. But generally what you would call mid-size owls? Yes, definitely. Mid-size owls are best with Ice Daggers. That's what a commando unit is, after all, a specialized unit composed of owls who are skillful with certain weapons. She paused and looked at me. Why all these questions? What if we redefine specialized to still mean focused, but include a mixture of owls of different sizes that excelled with more than just one weapon? You're losing me here. I had blessedly lost Ilfgar too, for he had fallen sound asleep. However, my mother continued to listen attentively as I explained. She occasionally stopped me to ask a question. The notion of the support of Killian snakes staggered her. Snakes? I hope you're joking. They have no native intelligence. They're lazy. They've never been challenged, Mum. We don't know what they might be capable of. Please hear me out. I paused. I knew that what I was going to say next was going to be difficult. Mom, when our pine tree was hit by those higher claws, you could have lost me as well. It was Gilda who saved me. She couldn't save Lice or Gundifer, but she saved me. Mum's eyes teared up. I extended my wingtips and stroked her back feathers. She found me, Mum, and she dragged me to safety. Killians are very strong. I know, she replied in a small voice. At least that's what they say. But what exactly are you getting at, Lies? Because although they may have many good attributes, they aren't owls. They can't fly. I'm not worried about that now, I said. I'm so relieved, Mum said, somewhat sarcastically. Her tone didn't bother me at the least. I was delighted to see that I had genuinely engaged her in this conversation. She seemed to be emerging just a bit from her fog of grief. I closed my eyes for a moment and drew in my mind a picture of a fleet, a light armored unit, a striker unit. That's what it would be, because we would strike before a conflict could even begin. We would complete daring mid-air reloads, and Killian snakes would serve as nimble ground forces. The notion of a few, for a few was all it would take, Killian snakes smashing a repository of ice weapons to smithereens was riveting. Balearic might be a tyrant. He was brutal. He fought savagely, but not with his head. We would bring a new kind of war to the Orphan Maker.